Welcome to this tutorial. My name is Johnson Dennis, and today I am going to be taking you on a road through Sqlalchemy library overview with practical approach on both the two components of Sqlalchemy, which are the Sqlalchemy core and Sqlalchemy ORM, which is the object relational mapper for Python. And I'm going to be making at least 3 videos for this playlist. So this is going to be a playlist, and we are going to start with Sqlalchemy core, and then the next video would be Sqlalchemy ORM. The third video would be all about metadata, views, procedure, triggers, and we might digress into using the SQL shell and back. So now let's look at what we are going to talk about on this video. We are going to look at Sqlalchemy core, which is a lower level SQL expression that will allow the construction and execution of SQL statements just like we would in an SQL shell, but in a programmatic way. So we are going to be looking at the engine dot connection, the engine dot reflects, how to reflect a table, the metadata, defining tables, and we talk about table column, table relationship, creating and dropping tables, the CRUD operations, which are the create, read, update, and delete. And we are going to talk about joins. We'll look at some of the mostly used joins like left join, right join, inner join, full outer join, and self join. So if the video is not too long, we will look at views and triggers. And also we will be seeing how to connect to SQLite or SQLite, and then MySQL and PostgreSQL. But for the whole video, I'm going to be using my SQL database. So let's get started. Mm, what we are going to be needing to start this is we are going to be installing python.env and SQLAlchemy, because for python.env we are going to be using it to retrieving the env variables which we are going to be housing inside this .env file. And for us to install it, we can open up our terminal, and maybe we are going to be using a virtual environment, and I'm going to call this VMV, and this should be able to create one. And another thing we are going to use is this extension for viewing the data in the database, and the extension is, let me open this. This is the extension. You can search for this in the extension and install it, and then to connect you can give it a name. So the name of mine is going to be test, and the user for connecting is going to be test, and the password I have is, I'm going to enter my password here, and then the database name, which mine is also test, and then we are going to save this, and also connect to it. If we pull it up, you can see where it says connection successful, and then I'm going to close this, refresh it, and then if I click on it, I'll see the name of the database, which is test. If I open it, I'll see query, I'll see there are no tables, I'll see views, and I'll see functions. So this is what we are going to be using. So now that the VMV is done creating, we can activate it by saying source.venv, which is the name, followed by bin/activate, and press enter. This should be able to activate it. If we want to deactivate it, you can say deactivate, which I'm not going to be doing. For Windows, I think is, if you're working on PowerShell, I think it should be script/activate. So with this out of the way, I'm going to create a directory here and I'm going to call it core, since we are going to be looking at core and Sqlalchemy, but for this video we are focused on core. So I'm going to be doing this inside core. And inside this core, I'm going to create a file and I'm going to name it db engine, because this is where we are going to be creating the engine for this video, for this project. And I'm going to import get env from os. We are going to be using this to get the environmental variables, and also I'm going to get from okay, I think we should first install the requirements. I'm going to say pip install. I'm going to use -r, which is recursively install everything in this file, which is going to do. And now that it's done installing it, I can go ahead and import.env from import load.env from .env. So this load.env will enable us to get the env variables, and down here we are going to get the env variables, which I've already shown you, which are inside here. So we are going to be using them to connect to our SQL. So the next thing we are going to do is to create a MySQL connection string, and I'm going to call it constring, and I'm going to be using an f string. And okay, there is something else we need to install. We need to install the MySQL connection for Python. Yeah, so this is going to be our connector, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to come here and I'm going to first start with the dialect, which is I'm going to be using MySQL. I'm still going to show you how to do it with Postgre and SQLite. So I'll say MySQL plus followed by the name of this connector that we just installed, which is MySQL connector, followed by this, and then followed by we are going to enter the username db user, which we are getting from the env variable, followed by colon, and then we enter the db password, followed by the db host, which is localhost, and then slash the database name. So now that we've gotten our connection string, the next thing we are going to do is we are going to import some of the things that we need from Sqlalchemy, and the first one is going to be the create engine. So we are going to say from Sqlalchemy import create engine, and this create engine is we are going to be passing this connection string to it, and I'm going to create a variable. I'll call it my SQL engine, and I'll call create engine. I'm going to pass in this connection string, and then if you want to do the same for PostgreSQL, you're going to install the cycle pg. I'm going to paste it in. Yeah, so for PostgreSQL, this is what you're going to install, and you're going to start with the dialect, which is PostgreSQL, followed by the connector, and the same way you pass in if you already have all these in your env, and if you want to connect to SQLite, You don't need any env variables. You simply just use this for connecting to SQLite. So I'm going to comment all this out. Okay, so just like we created an engine for MySQL here, you're going to create an engine for PostgreSQL. So you pass in the connection string to create engine. So this is going to be creating an engine for PostgreSQL. So I'm going to comment all this out because I'm going to be using MySQL. So let me get this right. This should be the DB user. So the next thing we are going to do is we are going to import a meta object to create an instance of the meta object. So we are going to be importing this from here. We import this metadata object and we come down here and we create an instance of this metadata. So every table must be created with the metadata object. So the metadata is what holds together features of the tables and database. Is like a container for features like table name, column type, primary key, relationships, etc. So it is important because you can be able to get the details of the database, assuming it was not created in the same context of your project. So this metadata is what we are going to all of the tables for this project. So the next thing we are going to do is to define a table, and we are going to be using this metadata. And for us to define the table, we also need to import a table object from Sqlalchemy, and I'm going to create this table, which is going to be users. This variable is going to represent the table, and we are going to use the table object, and this inside this table object is where we are going to be writing the first one. The text is the table name in the database, and then we followed by the metadata you want to be using for this database, and then we start with column name, and the name of this column, the first one is going to be an ID, and I also have to import column. So name of this column is going to be an ID, and it's going to be the primary key, and setting it as the primary key is just like creating an index of this key, because it usually creates a primary key on a column if that column is what you're going to be using most times to retrieve the value from the table. And then we are going to say auto increment. We are going to set it to true, so that when we are creating any user, we don't need to manually add an ID. So the database is going to increase the ID by itself, and then you are going to add another column, and this column is going to be a name, and this name is going to be a string of 60 characters. And also we have to import string, and we are going to add another constraint, and we are going to say nullable. We are going to set it to false, which means we don't want this column to be empty. It must have a value, and we're going to add another column, and this column is going to be an email. So we pass in the column name, and we'll just copy what we did here to the email. And also let's just add another one, which is age, and this age is going to be an integer, which we are going to import here. So let's not forget to specify the column type here. Let me push this down. So in the same way, we are going to create a table we are going to be using two tables. I'm going to create another one for accounts. So I'm going to just I'm going to rename this to accounts. It's going to be a type, and I'm going to set a default value for this. Let's say I want the default to be savings account. So every customer, every user is going to be having a savings account unless otherwise specified. And there's going to be a relationship between these two, which is going to be so the relationship between users and account is going to be okay. You're going to be using the user ID, which is going to be ID. So we have to remove this, and we have to when you're creating a relationship, the construct for the relationship is going to match the construct for the same column that the relationship is referring to, which here is an integer. So here is also going to be an integer. And we also have to import foreign key because we have to tell the database what we want to be using as foreign key. So right here, I'm going to pass the foreign key, and this foreign key, we specify what the foreign key is going to be, and it's going to be the users.id, not user ID, because you're telling it is going to be the ID of the users table. And also we have to state what happens if, let's say, if a user is deleted, this account that is associated with a user, what do we want to do with the row? So what I want to do is to say on delete, say cascade, which means if a user is deleted, the account that is associated with the user is equally going to be deleted. And I'm going to be setting the name of the primary key. I'm going to be setting it as FK, which stands for foreign key, followed by accounts, which is the table name, and followed by the table that is referring to and the column of the table that is referring to. And I'm going to remove this one because we don't need age for the account. So now that we've done this, the next thing we're going to do is to create a table in the database. So for us to create a table, we are going to be using this same metadata that we have here. So we are going to say metadata, and this metadata has a method called create_all, and this create_all takes the first option that it takes is the engine that is going to be using to connect to the database to be able to create this table, and we are going to set that engine to MySQL, which is the variable we created, which is this engine that we created up here. And now we are going to open up the terminal, and we are going to run this. I'm going to say Python 3. Okay, let me cd into core, and I'm going to say Python 3. Now press enter. We should be able to create the tables for us. And now that it's created, if we come here and go to this our database, if we should reload it, and if we open tables, you can see that we have users and accounts. If we open this, you can see that we have ID, name, email, and age, and also account. So there is one more thing, because I do not want to fill up each module with imports, because we are going to be modelizing this, like creating it in different files for each of the whatever subtopic that we're going to be talking about. Since I do not want to fill up each module with imports, I'm going to be using the wildcards. When you say from this import all. So since I'm going to be doing this, what I want to do is I'm going to use the dunder all to state the variables that I want to import when the wildcard is used. So I'm going to say all, and inside there, this is where I'm going to be stating what I want to be importing. I want to import this, and also I want to import the users table. I want to import the accounts table. I also want to import insert, because I'm going to be showing you ways to use the insert and select. And for us to do that, I have to let me and let's import select and also insert. So these are what I'm going to be using. The same way we use metadata and call the create all method, in a similar fashion, if you want to, maybe you've made changes to your table and you want to recreate it, because this method is only going to create a table if it does not exist. But if it exists, it's not going to create it again. So if you want to recreate a table, you can say metadata.drop all, and then you pass in the engine again, and this is going to drop the table. Let me put a comment here, say drop tables. And also, if assuming that you do not want to create this account table yet, you can just call users.create all, users.create, and then in the same manner you pass in the MySQL engine. So when you want to create a single table, there's no need to say metadata.create all, because this users variable now, if you see the way we do it, it already has the metadata. So if we just call users.create, this is only going to create this users table. So in the same manner, if you want to drop the table, instead of create, you're going to say drop. So I'll put another comment here, say create single table, and I'll put another one, say drop single table. So should be careful when you're using anything drop or drop all, because if you drop a table, it's going to delete every data inside that table. So let's go ahead to see. The first one we are going to look at is insertion, single insertion and batch insertion. And for us, what I'm going to do is inside this code directory, I'm going to create a file and I'm going to call it single insertion.py. Also, I'll create another one and I'll call it batch insertion.py. And then we are going to be importing all of this. So I'll close DB engine. You're going to start with single insertion. I'm going to say from DB engine import all. So this wildcard is what is the reason I created this, just like I said. So it's only going to import everything that I've listed here. Any other thing that is not listed here is not going to be imported. So to insert values into a table, we are going to use the table name. So let's create a variable. I'm going to call this statement1, and this statement is going to be the statement that we are going to be using to insert values into a table. And to do it, we are going to use the table name, which is users, which is where the one we are importing from DB engine. And this users table has a method that is called insert, and we can chain it to another method that is called values. This is where we are going to be passing all the attributes of the user that we want to add to the table, and we are going to be doing this by passing it as a keyword argument. So the first one is going to be name, which is the name of the user. which is going to be Johnson, and then the second one is going to be the email, and the email is going to be johnson@email.com, and then the third one is going to be age, and this age is going to be 100. I'm 100 years old. So this is one way we can create an insert statement. So there's another way we can do it, and that's by first creating the values. So the way we pass the values as keyword argument, we can create the values by as creating it as a dictionary, which I'm going to call account values, and we can create it as a dictionary. And then the first attribute is going to be type, and it's going to be a value check-ins, and the user that is going to own this account is going to be the first user that we add in. And since the primary key is starting from 1, which means the first user is going to have the user ID is going to be 1. So I'm going to pass the user ID as 1, and then we are going to see how we can use the insert. This is like this insert variable that we insert method that we imported from Sqlalchemy here. This insert, we are going to see how we can use it here, because we can use it this way. There's an insert that is attached to the metadata, that is the table variable, or we can excuse me, explicitly call the insert and then passing the table to it. So I'm going to create another statement, call it statement 2. Then we are going to use that insert that we imported, and then we pass in the table name that we want to insert into, and then do the same thing by calling dot values. And then we are going to pass in this value to it. And to do this, we are going to use this keyword argument by passing the double asterisk and then the name of the dictionary. So doing this, both of them work the same way. Either way you want to use it is fine. There's no difference. So the next thing we are going to do is to pass the insert statement. This statement 1 and statement 2, we are going to pass it to the engine.connect method. And we are going to do this in the manner of context manager. So if you're not familiar with the context manager, you can check the top right of your screen and watch the video where I talked about it, and you can come back to this video. So I'm going to do this in a try and except block. So like I said, we are going to be doing this in a manner of a context manager, and to do this we are going to use the with keyword followed by the engine that we created, the engine variable, that is this one, MySQL engine, and we call it, this engine has a connect method, and we set it as con. So the reason that we are using this in a context manager is that by using it this way, the connection is going to close by itself once the transaction is done. And then to use this connect method for inserting inside the table, what we are going to do is to say con, and then we are going to call the execute method of this connect method, and then we pass in the statement. And since this is a single insertion, we have to equally pass in the second statement. That is this statement and this statement. So the next thing we are going to do is, after passing this statement, we are going to call com.commit. So, and this commit, okay, the execute method, what it does is it marks the statement as ready, and then the commit method as and persists it to the database. And there's something else. So we also have to explicitly make sure that we have to roll back or reset the transaction if any error should occur by calling the con.rollback method. So this is going to make sure that it rolls back whatever transaction that has happened if there's an error that occurs within this transaction. So another way that we can do this is by using the engine.begin instead of using the engine.connect. We can also, let me copy this, by using the engine.begin, and also we are going to use the with statement, and we call MySQL, and now instead of calling .connect, we call .begin. Also we set it as con. So what this method does is, it does not need us to explicitly call commit on it. It is going to commit the transaction by itself, and it rolls back the changes for the whole transaction if an error occurs. So in the same manner, we say con.execute, and then we pass in the statement, and then we do the same for the other statement, the statement 2. So these are the two ways we can be able to do this. And so if you look here, using begin, we don't need to commit or roll back. Begin is going to do this for us. So I'm going to use the second one. I'm going to comment this out, and let's open our terminal and run this. This should be single insertion, and I'll press enter, and it says end of transaction. So we are going to view our database. Let me close this, and we are going to refresh it. And then if we check the user, so if we check the user, we can see that the user has been added. And also if we check the account, you can see the account that has been added. The user ID is 1, which is this user that has the ID of 1. So let's look at batch insertion. For batch insertion, I'm going to import this. Also, for the batch insertion, we have to create a list of dictionaries for each row that we want to add to the table. So I'm going to create one for users. I'm going to call the users value, and it's going to be a list. And inside this list, we are going to pass in the elements, and each element is going to be a dictionary that contains the columns or the attributes of the user that we want to pass, and I'm going to paste this in. So we are going to be adding two. First one is for Ben, second one is for Ali. So in the same manner, we are going to do the same for the associated table, which is account. And I'm going to copy this so I don't have to type it out. So for the account, this is for the user ID. We've already created one user in the table, so the second one should have the user ID of 2. So that's what I'm doing here. Ben is going to be having the account. This is this account, and the type of account is going to be savings. You remember that in the DB engine, we set the default as savings. So if we do not specify the type of account like we did here for Alice, the default is going to be savings. And so the next thing we're going to do this in a try and except block. So just like we've done, we're going to be using the engine.begin method. So I'm going to say with MySQL engine.begin as con, and then we're going to call the execute method and with execute method, with batch insertion, the execute method is going to be checking at least 2 arguments, which is the users dot insert, and then usually we chain it with values, but since it's a batch insertion, we are going to be passing the values as a list. We pass it this way, and then we are going to do the same for the account. Forget the same way that we did, we used the insert method that we imported from Sqlalchemy. We can equally use it with batch insertion. We can just pass accounts, which is the table name. We can pass it to it, and then followed by the values, which is a list. If you're coming from JavaScript and array, and which has elements that are dictionary. If you're coming from JavaScript, the objects, and this should be able to add this to the database. I'm going to open the terminal here. I'm going to clear it. And I'm going to run the batch insertion. And it says end of transaction. Let's refresh here. And we are going to open the users table, and we see that mm, the two has been added. We have Ben here. Excuse me. We have Ben here, and we also have Alice. And if we check the accounts table, we can see that also it has been added. So I wanted to do this in one video, but it seems like it's impossible. It's possible, but I guess I have to be doing this video by video. If so far you're enjoying this video, please support by subscribing to my channel and also clicking on the like button. And equally, you can buy me a coffee if you wish to. Just click on the thanks just like on this video. So see you in the next one.